Maybe you have asked yourself, how do we agree on what is good in society? What we see as the common sense. Surely common sense is not established only by power and force, because there has to be some understanding and legitimacy from the wider public for society to have long-term order and stability. In this video, we will explore the core concepts of Antonio Gramsci's theory of cultural hegemony, a theory that at its core aims to explain how the ruling class protects its capitalist interests through cultural institutions by generating consent through moral and intellectual leadership. If you are interested in more political science explainer videos, do consider subscribing for more videos in the future. The theory of cultural hegemony was developed by Antonio Gramsci, an Italian Marxist philosopher, journalist, and politician in the 1920s. As a member of parliament and general secretary of the Communist Party, Gramsci was arrested in 1926 at age 35 during Mussolini's fascist purge. At his trial in 1928, the prosecutor famously demanded, "We must stop this brain working for 20 years. But his brain didn't stop working as it was in prison, where Gramsci created what are now known as the prison notebooks, a collection of handwritten notes on political theory, which were smuggled out of prison and published after his death in a prison clinic in 1937. By the 1930s, more than a decade after the violent and abrupt Russian Revolution, Western capitalist countries remained surprisingly resilient to socialist revolutions. It was in this historical context that Gramsci developed and made his key contributions to political theory. In Gramsci's view, a class cannot dominate purely through force, so he made a clear distinction between coercive and consent-generating forces in society. Political institutions, the army, and the police are grouped as political society, while the cultural and private domains, like family, churches, media, trade unions, and more recently NGOs, are part of the civil society. The intellectual and moral leadership is created in culture and in the civil society. Gramsci observed that in Russia, the coercive element was extremely widespread, and the civil society was underdeveloped, making it easy for the Bolsheviks to overthrow and reconstruct civil society, while in the West it was the opposite. In the East, the state was everything. Civil society was primordial and gelatinous. In the West, there was a proper relation between state and civil society, and when the state trembled, a sturdy structure of civil society was at once revealed. Gramsci rejected the strict economic determinism of classical Marxism, and, in a way, accepted that the ruling class will meet certain demands from civil society and allow certain reforms. We can clearly see how this stronger relationship played out in the creation of the welfare state, combined with high productivity in the West, to reduce the revolutionary potential and influence of communism after World War II. So for Gramsci, although consent is mostly shaped by the ruling class, change is possible by developing a counter-hegemony in what he called the war of position. How do you change society, or how do you prepare for it? One option is revolution, a direct frontal attack in what Gramsci calls war of maneuver. But in modern societies, revolution is difficult, and the cost of maintaining success is huge. There needs to be a buy-in from the public and the civil society. Culture, norms, and values should be seen and feel like common sense, already absorbed through a shared ideology. The way to achieve success is by winning the war of position. In contrast to direct confrontation, the war of position involves slowly building alternative institutions, media, and cultural practices to challenge the dominant hegemony from within civil society. If the war of maneuver is a sudden uprising, then the war of position is a slow siege through which the oppressed classes need to develop their own counter-hegemony. In reality, progressive and conservative forces are always fighting the war of position on all fronts. The path forward is not always guaranteed. It all depends on who wins the battle for ideas, who better explains the common sense, and which ideas feel moral. Success in the war of position is never final. Cultural power swings like a pendulum, shaping the moral common sense upon which political power follows. The counter-hegemony needs to find a way into the minds of the public, but how? Gramsci's answer to establishing counter-hegemony is that the working class needs to develop its own intelligentsia and politically educate the public. For any chance to change the common sense, it's essential for the new counter-hegemony message to be simple and easily understood. In modern capitalism, where people have multiple cultural groups and personal identities, the war of position becomes very complex. but ironically, the messages become shorter and simpler. To create intellectual leadership, Gramsci made important theoretical developments in the formation of intellectuals. The main premise is simple. Intellectuals are not independent of the class they belong to. He made a distinction between traditional and organic intellectuals. The traditional intellectuals fall into the category of scientists, literary and professional intellectuals, and so on. Traditional intellectuals, according to Gramsci, although operating independently and in between classes, are inadvertently influenced by the dominant ideology and social constraints. Think of media oligopolies that may want to restrict certain narratives out of the main spaces of communication. Media journalists, even if they act with good faith and professionalism, are often constrained by advertisers, profit, and the corporate class interests. This self-censorship and propaganda model of communication in the U.S. was explored by Edward S. Herman and Noam Chomsky in their book, Manufacturing Consent: The Political Economy of the Mass Media. The second group is organic intellectuals, who represent the organizing and fundamental part of their social class. These types of intellectuals live, create, and develop their organic ideas from the class they belong to. A modern example we can argue is the famous Democrat Bernie Sanders or the YouTuber Gary Stevenson. Coming from a working-class background, they share unique insights into addressing the young and working-class voters' needs. For Gramsci, organic intellectuals are the ones who need to develop the counter-hegemony, win the war of position, and finally make the war of maneuver. Gramsci's concept of cultural hegemony was not constrained only to internal political systems. It was also expanded to international relations by Robert Cox and other Neo-Gramscian scholars. These international relations scholars see the world order as not only maintained solely by coercion, but mostly by the cultural leadership and support of neoliberal economic policies, helped by international institutions like the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, and the International Monetary Fund. So now let's get into what critics have to say about cultural hegemony. Gramsci's prison notebooks, since their first translation into English in the 1970s, have been hugely influential and discussed for their original contribution. One of the reasons for the success of cultural hegemony is its adaptability across various contexts, but it's precisely this flexible nature that is often seen as its greatest weakness. If we see culture as one of the most important factors for domination, then we can imagine it exists on a spectrum and varies across nation-states and societies. In closed systems, culture can be subordinated where no counter-hegemony can flourish, while in open systems, counterculture alternatives can be tolerated and visible. If we think of hegemony as existing on a spectrum from closed to open culture, then the essence of the concept is not manipulation but legitimation. Next, the role of language and rhetoric, although important for Gramsci, was never seen for its ability to coalesce people around a shared utopian dream and bypass the economic interests. Fascism succeeded in part by offering a seductive cultural myth, a return to Rome's glory. Mobilization through national pride and fear bypassed the initial need for economic reforms. In modern times, and in the West, we can say that the rule of law is a form of hegemonic utopia, in which all social classes can unite and then draw substance as a universal norm. There are many subjective cultural interests that cannot be reduced solely to economic interests. Lastly, between force and consent, there are many constraints that hold back the class revolt. The fear of unemployment is one such example clearly present in the US, where any attempts for unions are crushed immediately by corporate classes with the silent support of both parties. Similarly, the constraints on immigrant labor make revolt and counter-hegemony impossible because of the fear of deportation. These spectrums between force and consent are always present. So what does our cultural hegemony look like today? Is it a concerted effort by elite institutions? Is it maintained by distraction? Or is the dominant culture in society so ripped apart that shared common sense is so out of reach today? Where we can start to explore is the current shared dominant economic theory in the world since the 1980s, neoliberalism, which we examined in a different video looking through the prism of the current culture wars in the US. But the truth is that every society and era has its form of cultural hegemony. and it can take multiple forms depending on the country, local traditions, religion, and many other factors. What we can do is always question and examine the status quo and dominant narrative of our cultural institutions, ultimately aiming to ensure it benefits and protects everyone in society. Thank you for watching this video, and see you at the next one.